The point is, ISIL leaders cannot hide, and our next message to them is simple: you are next.
President Obama talking tough this week as he tries to reassure Americans he's doing everything he can to protect them. And we're back now with the panel. Well, first we have some breaking news. We were just talking in the previous segment with Adam Schiff about that flight that was diverted to Kenya because they found a suspicious-looking device in the lavatory. The CEO of Air France says now that they have inspected it and that it presented no danger to that flight or to the passengers on it. So that's some good news. We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got a bunch expressing serious doubts about the president's war on ISIS. David Hutchinson sent this on Facebook. If Raqqa is the de facto capital of ISIS, why is it not being leveled? And Andy Rotigliano tweeted this: if we are not at war with radical Islamic terrorists, then what does the I in ISIS-ISIL stand for? Julie, do they realize at the White House how fed up a lot of people are with the Obama strategy on ISIS?
They're starting to, and that's why I think you've seen the president over the last week or so come out and talk about the strategy against ISIS, the terror campaign more broadly, over and over and over again. I think you'll see him do that again in his State of the Union and through next year. What you're not seeing happen, though, is any real shift in the strategy. And I also don't think you'll see much of that next year. The president really feels like this is the strategy that will work over time. It won't work in a quick manner and in a manner that will be sufficient for a lot of people, but he believes in this. He is very resistant to calls for not only ground troops, but something like a no-fly zone, which Hillary Clinton supports. So I think you're going to see this dual track, one talking tough, but two not really changing the approach.
The president met with columnists this week, and there was a basic comment, not a quote, but a paraphrase of what he said that was first in and then very oddly was taken out of a New York Times story. We're going to put it up on the screen. Mr. Obama indicated he did not see enough cable television to fully appreciate the anxiety after the attacks in Paris and San Bernardino. Brit, what do you make of that?
I think it was snark against cable TV. And it fits in with what I think is the unmistakable subtext of what the president has been saying on this issue, and indeed of what he said this week. He conveys to me a clear impression that this ISIS threat is really overblown. Yes, Paris was terrible and San Bernardino was awful, but if you look at it in the larger scheme of things, which is how he professes to think of the world, ISIS is really too minor a threat to really worry that much about, and much too minor a threat for us to go all out and mount a major ground war the way we did to run Saddam Hussein's army out of Kuwait and later to invade Iraq or any of that. We don't want to do any of that. That's what he says ISIS wants. I can't believe ISIS wants that, but because they'd all be wiped out if we did that. But that's the impression he creates, that you've got to go with me in my more patient strategy, and I have my eye on the larger picture and really serious threats like climate change and the rest of it. And I think he's a little impatient with the American people for being so easily excited by cable news about these occasional attacks.
Okay. Juan, your thoughts about that? I mean, it was kind of astonishing for him to say, I mean, you didn't have to watch cable news to see one of the great Western capitals be paralyzed, to see 14 Americans killed and 21 others severely wounded in, not New York City, not London, but in San Bernardino, to understand that people would be scared out of their minds.
Well, I don't think that people are going to be scared out of their minds. Let's not go to hyperbole here. I think that you have a situation where one political party in specific, if you watch the Republican debate, it's all about terrorism. It's as if the world's coming to an end, it's Chicken Little, the sky is falling. And I think there's some people...
There's a lot of talk about terrorism at the Democratic debate,
as a result, it has spiked in terms of priorities, in terms of what Americans are talking about and in terms of our concerns. There's no question about that. But to say that it is, to the extent, from the president's perspective, worth putting ground troops on the ground, tens of thousands of Americans, troops getting injured or hurt, the kind of
Is that
commitment.
really the only alternative?
That's what he sees. That's the way he thinks about it, is what we're talking about here. The guy who says he
What
doesn't
about
watch
the
enough
no-fly
cable.
zone that Hillary Clinton wants?
Well,
What about the Pentagon talking about sending Apache helicopters and forward observers that are special ops?
If you have a safe zone, you have to defend it. And if you have a no-fly zone, again, we saw what happened with the Russians and the Turks. So you have all sorts of contingencies then that would draw you in where you would need
So just
to put
let those
ground
250,000 Syrians get killed.
No, to the contrary, I think the president's position has been very clear on this. He wants more aggressive. He's put the special ops on the ground. In fact, one of the Republican criticisms is he's got thousands of Americans there. We just don't call them troops on the ground. We don't admit to it, but they're there. And secondly, that if you get the Arab countries to take some action, this week we've seen some progress there. If you get the UN to say we're going to solve the Syrian problem, if you get the Russians involved in a productive posture, you are making progress. But the Republican chorus says no strategy or fail strategy.
George?
Well, it does seem to me when you get down to making presidential decisions about Apache helicopters or not Apache helicopters, and they can be vetoed by the Iraqi government, which seems to be somewhat under the thumb of the Iranian government. Not only do you see the complete folly of our last 15 years of foreign policy over there, but you have to sympathize with the president. I mean, how do we treat the Iraqi government? Do we treat it as a friend or a foe at this point? It's
That's frustrating.
It's more than frustrating, it's paralyzing.
Right. And the thing is, for all the Republican criticisms, Chris, you say, well, exactly what would you do so differently, Republicans? And you watch the debate, and I don't see it.
Do you agree with that?
Well, the willingness of the American people to commit ground troops to the fight against ISIS is growing. You can see it in the polling. That doesn't mean that we ought to do it or ought to do it yet, but I think that's the direction in which people are moving, and I think the president and by extension his Democratic colleagues and those running for president are in a bit of a trap here, because this strategy that he has, this patient, low temperature warfare, is probably not going to get the job done. And military experts say, you know, you've got to have a ground force of some substance to occupy territory, take it back from ISIS, and the rest of it. Now, whether some foreign army composed of Muslims largely can be mounted to do this is very much in doubt, which I think is a flaw in the strategy. The efforts they've made so far have utterly failed. So that's where we are. The question is this a job that has to be done one way or the other? Or, as the president thinks, I believe he thinks that this is really not that important.
Julie, and we've only got a little bit of time left, but why no-fly zone? Why, in effect, let Baghdad hold us hostage? For instance, there's a big, strong fighting force up north in the Kurdish area. Why not give them weapons and let them go at it?
I think on the no-fly zone, part of it is to Juan's point that there's a lot of players flying around in this area, and he worries about an American plane getting shot down. Also, he points out that ISIS doesn't have an air force, so you're not really having to worry about that.
And very quickly about not giving weapons directly to the Kurds?
Right now, what the U.S. is doing is giving weapons to the Kurds, but through the government in Baghdad. That gets to George's point. How do we deal with the government in Iraq?
Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.